Many of you know that on Thursdays, I go and spend time feeding my mom and hanging out with Dad. That makes for a good day off. It's a nice time just to chill and hang out with Dad. Well, one of the things that happens recently with Dad is that he's in the midst of purging his house. He's been doing this. But the one thing that he made absolutely clear to me a few weeks back, even about a year or so ago, he says, Dad, every book in this house is yours. Oh, thanks, Dad. I can't think of anybody else in the family that could appreciate all these books. Oh, okay. So I went busily about building a set of bookshelves at home to house this library of Dad's. And so I go over the other day, to Dad's, and he's like, oh yeah, Ted, come on down here into the basement. I got boxes of books all ready for you. And I mean, boxes. And he says, oh yeah, and in this closet, I've got all these books, these boxes of books ready for you. Oh, and by the way, any of these books here, you want to just take them right now? I said, Dad, I'm driving a Miata. Oh, well, okay, we'll give you one book, and you come and get the rest one at a time. So no, I go over to Dad's, and I get a box of books, and I put them in the trunk, and I put one in the passenger seat. I haul it home. I go over, I get another box of books, and bring it on home. And the thing that's fun is that these are some really great books. They're fantastic. And one of the things that as I'm discovering, as I'm going through Dad's library, and didn't really fully appreciate it when I was a child living amongst all these books, is the fact that Dad was a student of the classics. That was his major in college. He was a history major, and he focused on the classics. And his greatest love, besides my mom and Jesus, of course, but his greatest love was Alexander the Great. Now, let me tell you, if any of you want a book on Alexander the Great, see me. I've got about 20,000 of them. And I'm sure you could have 10 to 20 of them, and I'd never even see a piece of the library gone. But Alexander the Great was this marvelous ruler. He was a king of kings of sorts, in Greece. And here he was. My dad's got all this stuff on him. And Alexander the Great, I don't know how many of you realize this, but he was trained by Aristotle. And Aristotle was trained by Plato. And Plato was mentored and schooled by Socrates. Now, I'm not saying there's a direct lineage all the way to my dad, but I am saying that it's kind of interesting to see these great minds of Greece that have come together to try and figure out all that's going on in the world and who we are and what is our existence anyway and what we're all about. Well, that's Dad's world of the books. And I had to counter. I said, well, Dad, I know this really great Greek philosopher too. He's like, yeah? I said, oh, he is beyond the definition of intelligence. Even to his own words, he says, Socrates, Plato, they're all morons. Draw your attention to this great movie clip from The Princess Bride. Oh, we got to turn it up. Oh, stop. Are you ready, Jer? Here we go. Let's try it again. Oh, no.
Let me put it this way.
Oh, there it goes. Here it comes.
Plato, Aristotle, Socrates.
Yes?
Morons.
Really? In that case, I challenge you to a battle of wits.
For the princess? To the death? I accept.
Good. Truly, you have a dizzying intellect.
Wait till I get going. Where was I? Tell you in a minute. First, let's drink. Me from my glass, and you from yours.
You guessed wrong.
You only think I guessed wrong. That's what's so funny. I switched glasses when your back was turned. Ha ha, you fool. You fell victim to one of the classic blunders. The most famous is never get involved in a land war in Asia, but only slightly less well known is this: never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line.
So I show this movie to my dad, and he's like, "What?" Oh, yeah, I'm telling you, Vincini, when death is on the line. That's precisely what King Solomon is talking about here. He says we all end up as dust. And you know, you look at things and they just, wait a minute. Where is the logic, the common logic that helps us understand who we are? Where can we find that? What is it that we can latch onto, you see, because it's that common logic. That's what Aristotle was all about. He was all about logic and being able to find the answer to something through deductive or inductive reasoning. He would be able to point out that, yes, this makes full sense because I've been able to come to this point of recognizing its value. Well, all the while, as we look at our text from Ecclesiastes 9, here King Solomon is taking those things which you would think are common logic, those things that we as individuals would say, yeah, that makes perfect sense. You know, the prize goes to the strong. You know, the wealthy are the ones that have, the ones who are intelligent get all the wealth. Those who are wise get the bread. The strong ones win the battle. That makes perfect sense, right? King Solomon says, nope, sorry, not a guarantee. Ain't gonna happen. And for us today, we even think about it too. We say, wait a minute, why do bad things happen to good people? You know, logically, it doesn't make sense. I do all this stuff. Deductively, it should come to this point that everything should go right. But no, it doesn't happen that way. Oh, man. So what does King Solomon do? He goes to the next portion of his text, which is kind of interesting. And it points to a lot of what Plato was all about. Plato, you know, if you remember, you're really not sitting on a chair, my friends. It's just, you know, it's chairness. It's the essence of a chair. And there's this form that's out there, you know, that defines what is a chair. You know, so you have all this goofiness that's out there. You know, Plato talks about this. And so this next portion of Scripture, he tells this story about this poor wise man, which in a logical sense doesn't quite make sense. How can a wise man be poor? That doesn't make sense. Well, maybe from a Platonic view, it could make sense because ultimately he is living into the form of what is wisdom, and while he's living into his life, he is poor, but he is able to live into the form of wisdom. So we're looking at that form of wisdom that's being made manifest in this one poor individual, and he's able to save an entire city. Wow, that's pretty cool. King Solomon looks at that and says, yeah, seems pretty good for the time. But guess what? Time and chance happens to everybody. We all get caught in the fowler's net. We all get pulled out of the stream. Even this poor wise guy. What happens? He saved the city. Nobody remembers him. You know, they don't remember what he did. They really don't remember his name. So what really good value is it anyway? What does it make sense? You know, this doesn't make sense. What good is it? So there's King Solomon says there's no guarantee from that vantage point. So then we go to the next step. We think, well, okay, maybe, just maybe, this is it. From a Socratic standpoint. What was Socrates all about? We know that, the Socratic method. It was all about asking the question that would lead us to the right answer. Right? That's what Socrates did all the time. He'd ask you a question and he'd lead you to get to know the answer. And so precisely to be able to find that answer, which is, what is our ultimate being? This is a huge multi-syllable word, our ontological existence. How do we understand who we are? All these things. This is Socrates is like, okay, let's ask the question that leads to that. And what does he do? It's fantastic. King Solomon, he's 500 years before these guys. And he poses that exact thing. He says, here's the reality. You look at this and you say, okay, man's ultimate being, from a street smart standpoint, let me get to that first. From a street smart standpoint, is the fact that, okay, for us, what is our ultimate existence in being? Our ultimate existence in being is A, survival, right? And B, what did I put down here? I gotta try to remember this. Oh, crud. I'm drawing a blank. Cheat sheet. Hold on a second. I'll be right with you. There we go. Yeah, that ball game was great last night, but unfortunately, it has got me. It has got me good. Oh, yeah, of course. Why not? Of course. Why did I forget this? So you have this reality that it's about survival and common sense. That's street smarts would say that. That's what our existence is. That's who we are. We're all about trying to make ourselves survive. So we're not going to become roadkill. And we recognize common sense as one of the greatest values around. That if I treat you well, then you'll treat me nice. That makes sense. That's common sense. If you open the door for somebody, well, then great. Welcome them in. Or in a home situation, if you pour a bowl of cereal, guess what? Common sense says you roll the cereal back up again, close the lid, and put the box back in the cupboard. Yeah, you know where I'm coming from here. You can go up to Caleb and talk to him about this, all right? No, this is all common sense, So this is the kind of stuff we appreciate, We sit there and look at that and say, that's what it is. And so sure enough, here's what King Solomon's talking about. King Solomon is identifying this even as Socrates is talking about that question that leads us to the answer. In verse 17 of chapter 9 of Ecclesiastes, listen to what he says. This makes perfect sense. The words of the wise are heard in quiet, are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Well, yeah, of course. That's common sense. Of course that's the way it is. Wisdom is better than weapons of war. But yeah, of course. Of course it is. How many of us have ever thought, boy, wouldn't it be nice if the world leaders actually sat down to a game of chess and they played chess to find out who was really going to have control of a certain place or whose policy was going to be followed? Wouldn't that be marvelous? Man, all of a sudden then world leaders would actually have to be intelligent because they'd have to play the game and understand how to play chess. And it wouldn't be based on muscling around to get your idea or whatever it is across. Man, that'd be super. And then all of a sudden there wouldn't be so many people dying all over the place. Oh, well. So here we go to the end. And this is what King Solomon said. He says, but one sinner destroys much good. Yeah, there's Grandma's words coming back to us again. One bad apple spoils the bunch. King Solomon. So, what do we got? We've got nothing. That's what we've got. We look at wisdom and we say, yeah. Well, I'm here to tell you, folks, I'm not here to discredit all these schools of thought that have gone on and these great minds, the intellectual minds that are out there thinking through these things. That's not my intent here. But I think if we were to look at the first chapter of Corinthians, as Paul writes to the church of Corinth, that was in a seedbed of some of that Greek thinking. He is confronting that and saying, listen, folks, the very wisdom of man is foolishness to God. And he goes on in the very end of that portion of chapter 1, and he says, here's what it's all about. When we begin to think about what is wisdom, we need to put it into the divine furnace of God's existence so it becomes tempered to be what it really ultimately can be. Because if we base our wisdom purely on what we know and what we can ascertain or what we determine as common sense or logic, we're going to fall way short because things just don't make sense. And ultimately, Paul goes on to tell the church of Corinth, if we're going to base it on that, then we're basing things to be able to elevate ourselves and puff out our own chests. But Paul says, let us boast. If anyone's going to boast, let us boast in the Lord. That's where our focus should be. Not in whether or not we can contemplate our existence because we think from a Descartesian perspective, or to be able that we have this great vast wisdom to marry reason and experience together in a Kantian expression of life. No, that doesn't win. Because ultimately you're going to find yourself empty. But I will say, it's kind of fun. We go to our great, I don't know how many greats I want to say, great-grandpa of the faith. And this guy, here's a challenge for all of you under 30 years old. Because I remember when I was in seminary, I thought to myself, dag, what did I do to myself? How did I fritter away so many great hours of my life watching Hogan's Heroes? Because John Calvin wrote the Institutes of the Christian Religion when they were finally published in their final form. This is the fun part. I'm going to read you something from a young punk. This kid was final publisher, 27 years old, and he writes this stuff. Holy mackerel, what did I do? I must have missed the bus somewhere. No wonder Dad says, Ted, here, let me give you all these books. There's still hope for you. But here's the deal. As Calvin is starting out this marvelous treatise, this is just one of the 2-book volume. This massive comment on what is life, who are we, what is the church, how do we understand God and Jesus Christ and all those things. And he comments on all this stuff. And you think, okay, where do you begin something like that? How do you start such a project? Where do you sit down and really say, okay, yeah, I'll start this out. Well, what's he do? He goes and he tackles the predominant question that's been haunting people down through the ages and all the great philosophers down through the millennia. Who are we? And what is man? And what is our purpose in life? So the very opening sentence, he doesn't take some easy softball to start out his book. He runs right into the lion's jaw. And he says, okay, sentence number 1. This is how we understand the essence of who we are and the element of wisdom as being expressed before a holy God. The knowledge of God and that of ourselves, he puts, are connected. He says, without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God. And here he goes. Nearly all the wisdom we possess, that is to say, true and sound wisdom, consists of 2 parts, the knowledge of God and of ourselves. But while joined by many bonds, which one precedes and brings forth the other, is not easy to discern. In the first place, no one can look upon himself without immediately turning his thoughts to the contemplation of God, in whom he lives and moves. For quite clearly, the mighty gifts with which we are endowed are hardly from ourselves. Indeed, our very being is nothing but subsistence in the one God. Our very being is nothing but subsistence in the one God. Sure, there will be people that will respond like that great Greek philosopher Vincini. Inconceivable. But the reality is, God works in our lives, and we know because He first knew us. And this, my friends, is very smart, that equips us to be able to go out into the street, radiating the joy of knowing a Creator. When the world doesn't make sense, that is where wisdom resides. When we can't fully comprehend, because we're not going to boast in ourselves, but we boast in the Lord. Amen.